We started out doing just the Psalms of David. Last week we went off to a different person. We're going to do that again today. And then next week we're going to close out with the Psalm of David. But we're going to do a poem or psalm by the Sons of Korah. And if that sounds like a singing group to you, it actually is. But before it was a singing group, it was in the Bible. And so I'm going to want to talk about them a little bit. But before I get there, I want to just kind of give you just so you know, the overview of this psalm. It's going from pain to praise. Now, there's a lot of ways you can look at Psalm 84, and we'll talk about that. But I believe this is a story of a journey, and I believe the journey we're seeing in the psalm maps our journey in our lives. And so, again, we'll get into that. But before I get to there, I want to talk about who are the sons of Korah. They actually come, that phrase, the sons of Korah, come from the Old Testament, the book of Numbers. For those of you who are biblical scholars, you know it goes Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers. So it's towards the end of the journey of the Israelites, which starts in Exodus. So we're kind of towards the end of that. And towards the end of that, the Israelites are getting a little bit antsy. And they're starting to look at things maybe differently than they did in the early days. In the early days, they were happy to have Moses talking to God and then talking to them. But by the time they get towards the end, they're like, you know what, Moses, we've got it from here. And so that's what happens in the book of Numbers here. We're told that Korah, and of course we're talking about the sons of Korah, but that means there's a dad of Korah, Korah, the son of Izhar, and certain Reubenites, Dathan and Abiram, sons of Eli. And one son, just one from Peloth, became insolent and rose up against Moses. With them were 250 Israelite men, well-known community leaders, who had been appointed members of the council. So this is not a group, this is a mob, 250 people. That's pretty big. And they're going to complain to him. And they come as a group to oppose Moses and Aaron. Isn't it nice that we can see the promised land, we're going to reject our leaders? Like, early days, we counted on them, but this was going to happen. And they say, you've gone too far. The whole community is holy. All Levites are holy, right? Every one of them. The Lord is with them. Why then do you set yourselves above the Lord's assembly? Who made you boss, basically? And the answer to that, of course, is, well, God did. But they don't want to hear that. They're saying, if we're all holy and we're all blessed in his sight, then why do we need to listen to you two? Now, this is not the only time this happens to Moses, which is kind of interesting because Moses never wanted this job. God basically drafted him. He didn't want it. He never wanted it, but he gets stuck with it. And then people complain, why do you have it? I can relate. So this is how it goes sometimes. Like people get jealous of you. You want the job? I can see Moses, but he just basically handles this very gently, which he does. As the scripture tells us, he's a humble man. The problem is that was written by him. But he says, Moses was the most humble man on earth. I think actually is how he phrases it. But he is. Except for that part, but he's humble and he's gentle, and so when they come to him, he doesn't fight them at all. He says, "Okay, you know what? Fair enough. Here's what you guys do: all of you offer a sacrifice to the Lord, and get little incense burners and offer incense to the Lord and pray to the Lord. And I'm going to go over here and talk to God, and He'll answer your prayers." So they do this. They all gather together, and they get around the tents of Korah, and they light up all these incenses, all 250, because they're convinced that they're every bit as righteous and good as Moses. So then Moses goes and says, "Hey, God, are you watching what's going on here?" And the Lord speaks to Moses and says, "Okay, say to the assembly, move away from the tents of Korah, Dathan, and Abiram." This is a scary little prelude, right? Prelude when God says, "Hey, Moses, had everybody step to the right just for a second." That's what's going on. If you guys could just move in. So Moses goes, he says, hey, everybody, listen up here. There's going to be this little religious thing going on over here. I would like everybody to move to this side of the wilderness. Please, this side of the wilderness. So they do. And as soon as he finishes talking, the ground under them split apart, opened up its mouth, and swallowed all those associated with Korah and their households together with their possessions. They went down alive into the realm of the dead with everything they owned, and then the earth closed up over them. Literally, the earth opened up its mouth and swallowed them whole. How's that for response from God? So that's what happened. And you think, well, this is kind of an odd thing. Why would we be talking about it? Well, because later on in the scriptures, not here, but later on in the scriptures, there's this, one thing that you wonder how this happened so fast, right? It's like you're looking at it, it's like God spoke and Moses says, everybody moves over here. And we went from, hey, maybe we need to have a discussion about this to being swallowed by the earth, But hey.
Boy, that escalated quickly. I mean, that really got out of hand fast.
Yeah, it's amazing how fast that is. And after this whole thing happens, there is a scripture that comes by and says this: the children of Korah did not die. Or the old translations, the sons of Korah did not die. And in fact, they go on to become very important members of the worship team in the temple when David built it, which is, kind of a nice 180 there. Now, don't you know, they must have been pretty grateful that, it's like they got moved aside as well. That's interesting to me that they're doing all this, and when Moses said, okay, everybody move aside, the sons went too. It's like they kind of probably had a feeling, Dad, this is a bad idea, and they all move over. But the sons of Korah survive. And so then, interestingly, the sons of Korah will end up writing this Psalm 84, which makes it into our Bible, and it's literally a psalm about a journey back to God. Now, I don't think they wrote this in response to that. This came much later in their lives when David was king. But still, it's interesting to me that that's the psalm that gets put into there because they're talking about a journey back to God, and that is exactly what happened in their lives, right? Because Korah was insolent and disobedient to God, and they came back to him. So that's kind of the background here. But this is a psalm that kind of deals with this. Sometimes we just feel like God isn't there. Now, again, this is a physical thing the psalmist is talking about, but remember that maps to our spiritual journey, right? So he's talking about a physical thing. He's physically gone from the sanctuary of God, but sometimes we feel spiritually gone from the presence of God, and that's what this psalm is about. Now, in the psalm, we don't know why he's separated from God. We just don't know why. But in our journey with the Lord, typically speaking, when we're not with God, it's for some reason. It usually doesn't just happen. It's like I woke up today and God wasn't there. Usually there's something that actually drove us from the presence of God. It could be a lot of different things. It could be pain, health issues. It can be just depression in general, things going on in our lives. We've kind of just got it. It could be fear. We're afraid of something. And it kind of drives us away from God's presence. And we feel like we can't get to God. You feel like he's not there. And it's like that story. I know I've told this before about the older couple, this is the back roads and the farmlands, and they're in his pickup truck. They pull up to this stoplight, and in front of them is another pickup truck. Only in there's a young couple in high school. And they're at the red light, and he's got his arm around her, and they're canoodling, which is an old expression. So kids go look it up. They were canoodling, and they're at the stoplight, and the old woman looks over her husband, who's like a million miles away from her, and says, I remember when we used to go to red lights and stop, and you used to put your arm around me like that. And he looks over and says, honey, I haven't moved. But this is sometimes how it is with us. We look at God and say, God, I remember when you were close to me. I remember when I could feel your presence, and God's like saying, I haven't moved. Usually what's happened is something has driven us away from him. And so we feel I wish I could go back to where I was. I wish I could go back because I used to be better. But here's the thing, that pain is inevitable in our lives. We do go through it. We do go through illnesses. We do go through loss. We go through problems in relationships in our lives. We deal with disappointments. I didn't get the job I wanted, or somebody broke up with me, or somebody turned me down, whatever. We always deal with these disappointments. Those are inevitable. Jesus never said, hey, let me into your life and I'll make none of that happen anymore. That's not what he says at all. And so that's absolutely going to be part of it. But how do we turn that pain into pilgrimage? In other words, how do we say, okay, this is what's going on in my life. I'm going to use that to get closer to God, not let it drive me away from God, because those are decisions we have to make. No one's going to make it for us. God doesn't force us. So we're going to have to make the decision, how can I do that? And that's what this psalm is instructive, because he shows this progression of how he did it from a physical standpoint, but you also see the spiritual aspect of it. So let's jump into Psalm 84. He starts by saying, how lovely is your tabernacle. Now he's talking about a physical place, but he's not there right now. We'll see that as the psalm unwinds. He's just thinking back on it now. That's lovely. Just like those of you who have actually experienced God in your life, there's been a moment you've experienced that. You know how that feels. That's great. I love when I'm in the presence of the Lord. It's just a great feeling. I wish I were there now, but I'm not, right? O Lord of hosts, my soul longs, even faints, for the courts of the Lord. My heart and my flesh cry out for the living God. I want to be with you. I want to be in your presence. More than anything else right now, I need God. I need him because something's gone wrong. I have this problem in my life. And so I want you to picture whatever it is in your life that is causing that issue, because we all have a different journey, but it all kind of comes down to there's pain in our lives, and it has a tendency to push us away from God. I find this happens a lot when something happens to somebody, they pull away. And I don't actually stalk you all. I want you to know that. But it's amazing how often I do run into you guys when you're out. And I especially run into some people sometimes haven't been in the church for a while. And they, sometimes like in, Applebee restaurant or something. And so, they have, that's a true story. They can fill you in on it. And what usually happens is people don't determine they're going to leave the church. They don't say that. They just start, I'll take a week off, it becomes 5 weeks, and before you know it, I can't go back now. Everybody's going to ask me where I've been, it'd be creepy. I'm not going to do that. And so they're just not there anymore. We got a lot of people, a lot of these seats should be filled with people who've done that. It's like, I just never came back after COVID or whatever. So I don't actually stalk you all, but sometimes I do run into you out, because God has this funny sense of humor like that, And what will happen is I'll be talking to them, and I never ask where they've been. I don't, I might, when we're leaving, say we miss you or something like that, but I never, that's not who we are, right? And so, but they'll always give me their excuses, like I'm waiting to hear it, and they'll tell me everything going on in life, and they say, as soon as I get this fixed, I'm coming back. I'm like, that's why you should be there, right? You should be there right now, in fact. You should have been waiting for me at the door when I unlocked it on Sunday. What are you doing? But that's how it goes. A lot of times these things drive us away. Anyway, the psalmist goes on, and this is an interesting little detail he adds. He said, the sparrow has found a home, and the swallow a nest for herself, where they may lay their young, even your altars, Lord of hosts. So he's like saying, I'm not there, but these little tiny birds are. You know how birds get into places? Everybody like to Costco or Lowe's or something, birds are flying around. Well, apparently, when he was last in the tabernacle, he saw there was birds in the tabernacle who had made a nest in the altar, which almost seems sacrilegious. And he could be resentful of that, because isn't it tough when you feel a million miles away from God and you meet somebody who's just connected with God and telling you all the great things God's doing in their life? That's tough to take. And so it's easy at that moment to get resentful of them. And be a little bit bitter. We want them to enter into our dysfunction. We don't want them feeling the way they're feeling. We don't like that. It's easy to be resentful. But here's these birds in the temple that he can't go to. And you know what? He's saying, that's great. It's great that your temple can even shelter the birds. That's a fantastic thing. He's not allowing resentment to get in. He's saying, blessed are all those who dwell in your house. They will be praising you. They're there doing what I wish I were doing. Good for them. Good for them. See, the first turn we always have to make is to went away from resentment. That's the first little fork in the road we come to. When we're not where we want to be with God, maybe God hasn't answered our prayer like we asked. It's easy to get resentful of God. And resentful of other people. You seem to love them, God, but not me. But he's not going to let that happen. Even down to the bird, that's great. I think it's fantastic. They're singing, the birds are singing your praise. Fantastic. I love that. He's not going to let resentment. Do you know why? Because you're going to need, in the midst of your trouble, to come to the throne of grace. And if you're going to come to the throne of grace, you better be prepared to offer grace. That's how Christianity works. That's what Jesus says. Let us therefore come boldly to the throne of grace that we may obtain mercy and find grace to help in the time of need, is what Hebrews says. But in order for us to come to the throne, we better be ready to offer grace. And even sometimes when this happens all the time to me, I see someone who's a new Christian, and I see them getting all their dumb prayers answered. God is just answering prayer after prayer after prayer for them, I'm like, God, are you kidding me? That wasn't even a theologically correct prayer you just answered there, But, he's trying to teach them to trust him. He's got a different relationship with them, And now I'm supposed to be better, that I don't need all that. I'm supposed to have trust in him. And so this is going on. So you can't have the resentment. You have to offer grace to them in their stupid prayers that are getting answered. And so we have to be willing to do that, right? And we have to offer the grace if we're going to ask for grace. That's just kind of a biblical principle. But the other thing that he remembers, and we need to remember, is we are not alone. See, he's talking now about a journey. He's talking about a journey back to the tabernacle. In the same way, we're talking about a journey back to the presence of God. But here's the good news. Other people have walked that road before you. In fact, there's other people walking that road right now. They're just on a different spot on the road than you are. And so he realizes he is not the only pilgrim that's moving to the final tabernacle, and he's moving back there. He remembers he's not alone. He said, "Blessed is the man whose strength is in you and whose heart is set on pilgrimage." I'm not alone here. I'm like other people. We're walking towards you right now. Blessed are all of them. All of them. And of course, by implication, himself as well, because he's moving the right way. And they're moving the right way. And the same thing with the people in your lives. They're all moving the right way. Some people are early on their journey. Some people are older in the journey. But everybody's moving along the way. He says, blessed are they. He's seeing things the way God sees them. This is all good. This is all good. It's not just about me. Others have come before me on this journey. Now, in the New Testament, the author of Hebrews and Paul talk about this quite a bit. Said, do you understand that you're not alone on this journey? And in fact, the people who are on the journey with you are witnesses to what you're doing on your journey. In the book of Hebrews, it talks about all the people who have suffered and died for Jesus, but held their faith. He says, and they've been waiting to see Jesus, and we got to. And so he says, this is the thing that we have to understand. They make up a cloud of witnesses, he calls them. We are surrounded by a great cloud of witnesses. Do you know the saints are watching? Yeah, they are. Not just the people you know, but the people you don't know. They're watching your journey. This journey was laid out in order for you to be able to do this. People died to make this possible for you. And you're on the journey, and they're happy about it. So he says, let us throw off everything that hinders us and any sin that easily entangles us. That's resentment, bitterness, all the things that are pulling us away from God. He says, let's get them all out. Let us run with perseverance the race that's marked out for us. And do you know your race is marked out differently than my race? If you ever go up to Round Hill Park, sometimes my brother's the track coach for the cross-country team. He lays out cones for the truck to run. And it's different. He lays them out differently than somebody else might lay them out, right? In the same way, you have your path marked out differently for you than somebody else has. And you need to run that one. That's your path. You need to run with perseverance the race that's marked out for us. Paul says in Ephesians, consequently, you're no longer foreigners and strangers. You're fellow citizens with God's people. You're members of his household built on the foundation of the apostles and the prophets. It's not just you. The foundation of this church was built on the apostles and the prophets. Your journey is part of that. You're part of a community, you understand? And that's part of where you can derive strength from, because you know people like you have gone through this already. Everything you're suffering through, somebody else has suffered through. And yet they made it all the way there. We all have to pass through something called the Valley of Baca. And this is the next verse in the Psalm. But just to let you know, the Valley of Baca is a dismal place. It's dry. There aren't very many shrubberies and things. It's not very green. It's kind of brown and dirty, kind of like Cleveland. But, it's like, anyway. But it's a arid place, right? And so we have to pass through that. You do. You have to pass through that. That's part of your journey. And he says this, he's talking about the pilgrims now, as they pass through the valley of Baca, they make it a spring. The rain covers it with pools. They go from strength to strength, and each one of those people will be appearing before God in Zion. They're going to make it. But they're not just going to make it. They make that barren place full of life. Full of life. In the worst part of what we're going through, he's saying we can bring life to it. In fact, we're supposed to bring life to it. And that's not easy to do. But that's what he's talking about here. It's amazing. The pilgrimage, though, it's a highway, not a back alley. You're going to get through this. You know, yea, though I walk through the valley in shadow and death, as the psalmist says in 23. So we're going to go through it. It's a process, but you have to go through it. And while you go through it, you should be offering life to those around you and those who come after you. See, pain's greatest lie is that because you're in pain, you're useless. See, the devil wants to do two things. He wants to separate you, which is why it's important to remember you're part of a community. And he also wants you to feel you're alone and useless. Because Christians who are alone don't scare him. It's when 2 or 3 are gathered in his name that the strongholds of his little army starts falling apart. That's what scares him. He's afraid of the people who through the pain still praise the Lord. He's the people who through the pain still come together. That's what frightens him. Because those people know that this is a lie, that just because you're going through pain, you're useless. He knows that, which is why he's fighting very hard to get you to not know that. See, prayer is still available to you. And prayer is a mighty weapon. I know we don't feel like it, which is why a lot of times we don't do it, but prayer is a mighty weapon. And he says this, O Lord of hosts, hear my prayer. Give ear, O God of Jacob. O God, behold our shield and look upon the face of your anointed. You know what he's saying here? While I'm walking towards you, I want you to bless your servant David. The king, that's the shield. The anointed one, that's David. He's actually taking time out right now to pray for someone else. He's praying for his king. He's praying for his people. He's praying for the people around him because he knows that he might be in a jury right now and he might be in the valley of Baca, which is a miserable place, but that doesn't mean that the prayers he offers aren't heard. You understand? It's just not as fun. Years ago, I was learning how to write. I was writing my first novel, and I was in high school. Star Wars had just come out, the original Star Wars, not this crap Disney's sending out now, the real one. But it was like, oh, we all loved it. It was such fun to go to the movies in those days. And so I was going to write a sequel to it because in those days, we didn't have videos. We didn't have DVD clips. If you wanted the story to continue, it was up to you. So I was going to write a sequel, you know. And so I sat down, and in a fit of inspiration, I wrote. And that's how I always was. When I was inspired, I wrote, and I cranked off. I think 21 pages or something like that. And I had them done, and then the inspiration left. So I stopped writing. And but I put it in a folder, and I drew the logo to Star Wars on the folder. You know, that I couldn't write, but I could decorate what I did. You know, I had a long way to go, but I was decorating what I did. And then school started, and I went back to school, and it turned out that the very first day of school, I'm in Spanish class, and my Spanish teacher, and I've mentioned her before, just because I have to say this, I'm not making this up. Her name was Mrs. Pecora. But you know, in Spanish, if you're female, you're Senora. And her first name was Enora. And rumor had it that she lived in Denora. So she was Senora Enora Pecora from Denora, was my Spanish teacher. And I was a bookish, nerdish kid in school. And so she walked in, and the very first thing she did was she took this loudmouth, noise-making guy in the back room and moved him right next to me because she figured I'd calm him down. His name was Ed Hinchy. We became best friends, and we're still friends this day, right? Ed comes down, and Ed had never met a person he didn't know, and he sits down down and be, hey, my name's Ed. He says, what you doing? He looks over and he sees that folder. He goes, what's this? He pulls it out. And I was mortified because the last thing you want people to think is that you're writing. And we'll talk about geek of geeks. It's a nerd of nerds. You don't want that. I won't give me that back. Well, is this Star Wars? And he went, oh, you wrote this? Now he's a big Star Wars fan too. So he starts reading it. And I'm like, oh, I want to yank it out of his hand, put it away. I don't want anybody to know this is going on. But Ed doesn't read like normal people. He reads out loud, not words, emotions. He'll laugh. He'll, oh, all right. He like talks like a black congregation talking to their pastor kind of talks. Yeah, okay. And like, whoa, this is interesting. I've never gotten feedback like this from my writing before. And so I go, okay, this is all right. And so he gets all the way to the page 21. He says, where's the rest of it? I said, well, I haven't finished it yet, but you're writing it, right? I said, well, of course I am. How often do you write? Every night I lied. He said, so you're going to write something tonight? I said, yeah. He says, well, how many pages do you write? I write 3 pages a night, because that's about an hour, and I knew I could write about 3 pages an hour. He said, cool. So I'll see 3 pages tomorrow, right? I said, yeah. That began our friendship. Every day, I would bring 3 pages into Spanish class. Over the weekend, he'd expect 6. He was like an editor. And I was writing him, and there were some times, I'm telling you, I was typing on a typewriter. Back then, kids, you have no idea what that was like, no word processors. But on a typewriter, you set the margins, and you set the spacing between the lines, And there were some times I was so miserable. I thought, oh, I'd move the margins in, and I'd go triple space, just so I could get those 3 pages out in a half an hour or whatever. So I did it. And so we made it all through school year like that. I never did finish the book there, but we became best friends. And that year, at the end of the school year, I stopped writing because Ed didn't pester me throughout the summer. And I put it on a shelf, and I thought, someday I'm going to have to finish that. And then I thought, man, that was probably really bad. I don't even want to look at it, And so finally one day I pulled it down, and I started reading through it. I thought, this is going to be bad, because I remember how many times I did not want to write. And the first 21 pages, I remember, they were inspired. Those were good. But page 22, I was worried about. But page 22, and I started going through them. I think I had 150 pages done or something like that. And it was clearly the best thing I'd ever written in my life. And here was the thing that was just amazing to me. Some of the best stuff in the book had those margins where I knew I was cheating. And yet it was the best thing I'd written. And that's when somebody had said to me, a writer, professional writer, came back to me, and they said, a writer writes. He just enjoys it more when he's inspired. And I'm telling you, a Christian prays. They just enjoy it more when they feel the presence of the Lord. You're going through Baca, it doesn't mean your prayers aren't heard. Maybe some of your best prayers are being offered up in that moment of pain. But instead we stop, and we never reach out to heaven. Lord of hosts, hear my prayer, he says. Hear my prayer. In 2 Corinthians, Paul talks about this. He says, there was a thorn in the flesh was given to me, a messenger of Satan to buffet me. Concerning this thing, I pleaded with the Lord 3 times that it might be taken from me. And he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you. My strength is made perfect in weakness. What he's telling him is, you know what, Paul? When you're weak, I'm strong, and my strength comes through you purely because you can't get this on your own. You can't lift a 250-pound cabinet on your own. You're too weak. If that fall on Ron, that wouldn't be such a big deal, him lifting up a cabinet, but it didn't fall on Ron, right? Through your weakness, God's strength is shown. And so that's what he's saying there. He says, you know what? Because of that, I am gladly boasting in my infirmities. I'm glad I have this. We don't know what it was, by the way. Some people think it was a astigmatism in his eye. Some people think a limp. People think he developed a stutter, which would be a hard thing for a preacher to have. But he doesn't tell us that because that's not important what he had. What's important is he learned, you know what? When I'm weak, Christ is strong. Make me weaker because I want you stronger. Because I know my work doesn't count. It's your work that counts. In the midst of his pain, he was stronger because he let God work through him. You see the pattern that's being developed here. Okay, so I was listening to a sermon of a guy who is a pastor, and he told a remarkable story that shortly before he was ordained, right before he graduated from seminary, he lost his faith. I don't know what happened. He didn't tell us. Surely something happened in his life that made him wonder, where's God? We've all been there, or most of us have been. Anyway, I have. Where is God? What's going on, God? Can I believe in this God? Right? He went through that. He said, in fact, he remembered his birthday was coming up like a little bit before he was going to be graduating from seminary, and a friend of his asked him, what would you want for your birthday? He said, my faith back. That's a real hard place to be when you're getting ready to become a professional preacher when you don't believe in God anymore. And he was trying to fight through it, but it was like, he was caught in depression, a cycle of depression. And he didn't know what he was going to do. He said it was to the point where he couldn't see a church without feeling his stomach churn. That's a tough place to be when that's your job, right? And so he's decided he needed to force his way through it, kind of grit his teeth and get through this. And so he told himself, even though he didn't want to, he was going to pray for 1 minute every night. Now, that's pretty bad if you can't get through 1 minute of a prayer. But he says it was all I could do to pray for 1 minute. I was that depressed, that angry at God. But he made himself do it. And he said this, do you know why? Because if I didn't bring my pain to God, my pain would become God. See, that's the problem with pain. That what happens is, if we don't bring it to God, honestly and openly, if we don't make ourselves do that, if we do not bring your pain to the throne of God, then pain sits on the throne of your heart. And it becomes your God. Think about it. You wake up in the morning and all you can think about is what's going to happen today with my pain, whatever that pain is, whether it's physical, emotional, whatever. You go to bed at night, and I hope it doesn't wake me up tonight. You make decisions based on how the pain's going to affect you. You talk to people based on that. You do or do not go to church based on that. You do or do not pray because that. What has happened is your pain is dictating your life, and it has become your God. And I know a lot of people who've gone through emotional pain, they let it become their identity. They can't let go of their emotional pain, because if they let go of their emotional pain, who are they anymore? It has become their God. It's become a replacement for God. We see a story like this in the Bible. Naomi and Ruth. Naomi has a family. She has a husband and 2 sons, and they're in the promised land shortly after the promised land's there, and a time comes, a famine hits the promised land, and they get scared and say, whoops, let's go over. Let's go. Let's not go there. Let's go over someplace where the grass is green. So they left. They left their promised land behind. And so they lived in a foreign land. And while they were there, her husband and 2 sons die. Like suddenly. And so now she's in this country called Moab. She doesn't know a soul there. Everybody's gone. Nobody takes care of a widow, by the way, in those days. You have no rights to anything there. The only thing she had right to was her ancestor land back in Israel. So she gathers her two stepdaughters and says, look, there's nothing left for me here. I'm going home. You are free to go find husbands for yourself here. You're still young, because her sons died young. She says, you're still young enough that you can have a life. And the one stepdaughter says, okay, and goes off and marries somebody else. But the other stepdaughter, whose name is Ruth, says, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to go with you. And your people are going to be my people, and your God is going to be my God. And so they start the journey back. And let me tell you something, Naomi is not a pleasant person at this point. Ironically, her name actually means pleasant. That's what Naomi means. But she is not a pleasant person now. She's bitter, and she hates God. And she's angry at God for everything that's happened to her. And yet Ruth continues to go and keeps kind of a cheerful spirit about her. And we see the response of 2 different people here, because Naomi is so bitter that when she gets to Israel and people say, Naomi's back, she says, do not call me Naomi. I have changed my name to Mar, which was a bitter root. I've changed my name to bitterness. I'm no longer pleasant. Well, Ruth kept pursuing God. And what ends up happening is God blesses her so much that she blesses Naomi through her. Remarkably. And so we see the result of the 2 different things. We see the result of living with bitterness and living with joy. But I don't know why Ruth, I'm guessing it wasn't Naomi, I'm guessing it was Naomi's son, must have shown her something about Jehovah that she goes, I want to know more about that God. And so she ends up coming to God. She didn't let the bitterness stop her, but she had every right to. She lost her husband. That's not easy for a young woman at any time in life, but it's really hard in those days because losing your husband meant losing everything. And she wasn't bitter. Naomi let her pain define her, but Ruth used her pain to find her way to God. This is the whole thing. And so that's how we have to keep our eyes on God. And so now the psalmist says this, and the very famous verse in this psalm is this one, for a day in your courts is better than 1,000. The song says elsewhere. The day in your courts is better than 1,000 elsewhere. I would rather be a doorkeeper in the house of my God than dwell in the tents of the wicked. For the Lord God is sun and shield. The Lord will give grace and glory. That's why I'm traveling there. I could stay here and be a big deal, but I don't care about that. I'd rather spend one day with God than that. I'm going to keep moving forward. And then he ends with this. No good thing he will withhold for those who walk uprightly. O Lord of hosts, blessed is the man who trusts you. Remember, that's always how you read a psalm. Read the last verse first. This is what he's telling us. Blessed, Lord, is the man who trusts in you. And that's what he's calling us to do. On our journey, we're supposed to trust in him. But I want to come back to this idea that just because you're in pain, you're useless. Because that is such a lie. And I want to get you focused on this because the greatest pain in history turned into the greatest glory in history. And that's the pain that Jesus experienced on the cross. And you couldn't have it any worse than this. From the 6th hour until the 9th hour, there was darkness over the entire land. The whole world went dark as Jesus is ready to die. And about the 9th hour, Jesus cried out with a loud voice saying, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani, which is, my God, why have you forsaken me? By the way, I'm not a big guy about the passion plays. If you guys like to go to them, go ahead. I don't like them. The reason I don't like them is because they focus on the physical pain of Jesus. But this verse here, he's not talking from a physical standpoint. He's talking from a spiritual standpoint. Because the first time since the world was created, he is separated from his Father. That's the pain of Jesus. We just don't know what that's like. We have no idea what it's like to live in communion with the Father like he did. So we have no idea what it's like to have that ripped away from you. But this is what made him sweat blood in Gethsemane, not the physical. This did. This is the greatest pain he had. He was completely alone in this moment, dying on a cross. And from this excruciating physical, emotional, and most important, spiritual pain, he delivered us all. Jesus delivers from darkness by enduring his darkest moment. Don't ever let Satan tell you just because you're in your pain, you can't be a blessing to others. We know better than that. In fact, Hebrews says this, therefore, brothers and sisters, we have confidence to enter the most holy place because of the blood of Jesus. The whole reason we're here is because he was willing to endure the pain and bless us through it. Let us draw near to God with sincere heart and full assurance, having our hearts sprinkled to cleanse us. Now we can come to God. We have that ability. Jesus broke the barrier. See, we need to press on towards his presence until we see his face and experience his grace. This is the journey. This is the journey through the pain to praise. You'll get there, but you can't stop. It's a journey, and you have to work through it. You're going to have to go through Baca, and you're going to have to learn how to bless others, not be resentful of them, and keep moving forward, and eventually you'll be face to face with the living God.